I call the Honourable Member Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, as other members have begun their contributions to the debate, I'd like to follow in that tradition by congratulating Holly Walker on the drawing of her bill for debate in the House. And I'll say to her what I said to Sue Kedgley when the bill was originally drawn and before it was transferred into her name. Certainly members on this side of the House are very supportive of the idea of greater transparency and bringing that greater transparency to the House in the lobbying area. And if that can be done in a workable way, then Labor members will look forward to supporting the legislation further. But what we can't do, I think, is ignore the very real concerns that have been expressed to us about the practicability of the bill, and that's especially the case from the community and voluntary sector. The number of non-government organisations, voluntary organisations who have come to me and other Labor members and expressed real concern about the sort of reporting burden that this legislation would put on them simply cannot be ignored. And that's why what I've done is tried to crystallise some of the objections that have been expressed to us and that we sympathise with in a supplementary order paper that I've tabled at the first reading so that Labor's objections to the legislation can be clear from the outset and we can hopefully get some changes under discussion as early as possible. So the three fundamental changes that the supplementary order paper in my name would affect are as follows. First of all, they would make it very clear that the target of this legislation ought to be lobbying for commercial purposes. In my view and in the view of my colleagues, there's simply no public interest or no similar public interest in subjecting big tobacco, big alcohol, big pharma or big food to the same sort of transparency requirements as might apply to a small NGO that's delivering social services or health services or representing a particular philosophical, religious or other belief. And so the first thing that my supplementary order paper would do is it would make it very clear that the focus of transparency, registration and what have you ought to be to those big commercial interests, because that is the area where under our laws at the moment there isn't sufficient transparency. An NGO, a voluntary organisation, an incorporated society is accountable to its members. It is very clear through its reporting what it does from day to day. That isn't the case even in respect of a corporate, let alone an association of corporates or other commercial interests. And I do agree that there ought to be a focus on those sorts of interests and a better idea amongst the public about how they are seeking to exert and indeed are exerting influence. So that's the first change that we would want to see. The second change is one that I think Holly Walker has conceded needs to be made, and that is it needs to be absolutely clear that communications between members of Parliament and constituents are not caught by this legislation. We all know, because we've all been in the position of having members of the public come to us in confidence, express concerns, express a desire to see us take up causes on their behalf that they wouldn't want the public to know about because they're deeply personal to them. And it has to be absolutely clear that that remains inviolate. And the final amendment, sir, that I've foreshadowed is an attempt to make the exemption that currently exists for public servants workable by actually extending it to all those who work in the wider state services. So, sir, I hope that we can make something good of this bill. I apprehend from the speeches across the House that it will go to the Select Committee. I hope that the legislation that emerges from the Select Committee can be workable, and I hope that the supplementary order paper that I have provided helps to point the way to at least some of that workability.
I call